think a few more people might come in dribs and drabs, but we'll get started. Good morning, everyone. My name's Marianne. I'm one of the co-artistic directors at Collective Encounters, and we're delighted to see you this morning for our open space, which is our second event in our Autumn Radical Retrospectives Festival. So this event, if you don't know what you're at, is creativity, archives, and social justice. And this is something archival practice we as a company have been really interested in for a number of years. And we've done bits and bobs, different projects engaging with different archives. And then over the last 2 years, as part of our lead up to our 21st birthday celebrations, we have been creating our own archive, which has been a challenge and a joy. And we've also been wrangling digital to kind of make it digital. And this is what really motivated us to want to talk about archives this morning, because they have a really important place in social justice work, and there's also a lot of really interesting work being done to upend traditional archiving processes and practices, which can be quite extractivist, come from a kind of colonial, white, patriarchal perspective. And we're interested in how you undo these things, but still stay somewhat true to archiving practices, and protecting and platforming heritages that haven't necessarily been archived, been documented by the people from those communities. So that's what we'll be exploring today in this event. I'm going to just share my screen if I can. Let me get onto the right screen. So here we are. Welcome. I think I've done that. Slideshow. Here we are. So, with that in mind, we have our calling question today because we are a theatre company and a theatre for social change company. So we're always interested in the role of the arts and the role of creativity in everything we do. So our calling question for our speakers today and for you, our audience, is what can creativity bring to archiving practices, especially through a social justice lens? So we'll have two provocations this morning. The first will be from Pawlet Brookes, who is the artistic director and CEO at Serendipity in Leicester, and Lukasz Rizzo, who is the archivist of the MayDay rooms in London. So we'll be hearing a bit from them later. The other thing that is important to note in this event is that it's an open space event. So after we've heard from each speaker and we've had a Q&A, we will decide the agenda for the second half of the meeting together. So do take notes of what's discussed in the provocations in the Q&A, or if there's any motivations that brought you here this morning. There will be a chance for you to suggest topics for the discussions that we will have in the second half. So I'm going to stop sharing there if I can. Brilliant. I also want to note that the first half of the session is being recorded. So if you don't want to appear in the recording, that's fine. Just pop your cameras off for the first half. That will be uploaded to our YouTube channel later, so you can refer back to it and send it to anyone you think might be interested. We also this morning have our Otter, which is our live transcription service. So if you need to follow along a live transcript, there is a link in the chat for you to follow, and you should get the transcript pop up on another screen. Brilliant. So I'm going to come out of that and see where we are. Fabulous. So I think we'll get straight on to the provocations. If people arrive, Emma and I can let them in. So I just want to introduce Emma before we start. Can you give us a wave, Emma? Emma is coordinating and producing our Radical Retrospectives Festival and will be supporting me with technical things, troubleshooting this morning, but also will be timekeeping. So each of our speakers has been given 7 minutes to speak about their organisation, their work, their relationship to archives, and hopefully give us some provocative, juicy bits for discussion. And Emma will give each speaker a warning at about 6 minutes that they've got a minute left.
Yeah.
After each, we'll tag team it. So Pawlet will speak first, then Lukash, and after that we'll open the floor to questions. So do start thinking about things that you might want to discuss, any questions you have, any thoughts that the speakers raised this morning. Okay, I think that's almost enough of me speaking. So it's a great lineup this morning, and I'm really excited that Paulette could join us this morning. So we'll introduce Paulette first. Paulette is the artistic director and CEO of Serendipity, whose tagline is the Institute for Black Arts and Heritage. And I found Serendipity through doing a lot of research into kind of who was doing really interesting, cutting edge work with archives. And I have to say, after this, if you haven't had a look at Serendipity's online living archive that Paulette is going to speak about, it is a fantastic example of digitizing beautifully history and heritage of Black culture. So I'm really excited that Paulette can join us. I'm going to spotlight you for everyone so that we can see you this morning. Brilliant. And Emma, tell us when you're ready.
Okay, so I'll start your timer now, Paulette.
Thank you. Welcome, everybody. I'll just contextualise that our full title is actually Serendipity Institute for Black Arts and Heritage. And that's really interesting because arts and heritage, as you know, run parallel lines. And the fact that we decided, and I feel that we've been trailblazing and we're ahead of the game, and we decided that it was a nonsense many moons ago and decided to bring the two things together because one informs the other. So Serendipity was founded in 2010 by myself in the midst of a recession. And again, it's, one of those things when you decide to do things where it's not really feels healthy to do that because it's a recession. But a recession is a good time to start things as far as I'm concerned, because if you can navigate that, then you will be successful. So our flagship projects and the way we started was the project called Let's Dance International Frontiers, which is an annual dance festival, which has been running for 15 years now. And we do a host of things of not just dance, but there's also dance dialogues, there's films, there's there's work, and we marry arts and heritage in terms of the work that we do. Everything we do is documented, and so that was the beginning of when we started to document in terms of publications. So we document the conference that we do every year. It is themed every year, and that's documented. All the voices are of practitioners. Everything that we do comes out of the African Caribbean or the Latinx community where it meets diaspora. So I'm talking about Colombia, Brazil and other countries like that. So, and all our authors and all the writers are all from that ilk. They're all Black. So we've also published 30 books and magazines. We've got 4 more coming out this October, which is Diasporic Dialogues, 40 Years of Leicester Caribbean Carnival, Black Ink issue 6, and The Forensic Ballerina. And all of them, you'll see that heritage will run through right throughout all the publications and the work that we do. The publications are also available on EPOS, so they are also available in terms of academia. The reason for doing the publications is because as much as we do digital disappears in the ether after 5 years, but if you do a publication, you'll find it in the British Library 400 years time. So they're limited editions, but they're really, really important that we make that anchor and we change the narrative that's out there. So we move from having a double-sided coin to a coin that says heads and tails, and so we start to punctuate the narratives and the books that are and the legacy and the things that you see in those sorts of buildings. So that's really, really important in terms of the books that we do. 2017 also marked the 30th anniversary of Black History Month. We're getting ready to do the 40th anniversary. So what we did a publication called Lost Legends, and we did an exhibition as well. And what's really interesting about Lost Legends, we also did a short film, was that we did with the publication a sort of strategic intervention. So although it had 30 voices and 30 people talking about Black History Month, at the back of the publication we put a timeline which goes back 250 years. One half of the timeline gives a national picture of what was going on in arts and culture and creativity, and the other half of the timeline gives you a sense of what was going on specifically in Leicester, showing that Black history, Black culture, Black people, that they were already here, already doing work, and we felt it was really, really important that it was not just a celebration about this moment, but the context, because context is really, really important, so they see where Black people reside in terms of the work that they've been doing. Out of that also grew our initial project, which we're funded through the National Heritage Lottery Fund, which is Unearth Forgotten Histories. An initiative that really, really has started to shape the sector when you're looking at Black arts and heritage and what that means. So one of the first things in looking at that was looking at, well, who are the archivists? Who are the people? Only 1% of archivists in this country are Black. And so that is a problem straight away that, so when you go into a museum or an exhibition, you don't find yourself. And when you do find yourself, it doesn't reflect your history, or it reflects a partial history, or a history that, appeals to the West. So it comes from a Eurocentric perspective. And when we were pulling this together and we went round different museums, and I was almost like a secret shopper going into museums to look to write our application, it was really quite horrifying, really, that, we've got these exhibits and exhibitions that have been there from the year dot, and they're wrong. So, they put things and the language be wrong. It would be in Igbo, but they wouldn't put it was in Igbo. Some white, person had gone and said it's this, and everything was labelled wrong, and things are wrong. And you'll find that, I think we need to revisit some of the exhibits and things that we've got in museums, and just get them, reassessed in terms of what they're saying and the narrative that they're bringing to the table. We also did another public-facing exhibition about a boxer called Larry Gaines in our project Archiving the Past, Reflecting the Future. Larry Gaines was around in the 1930s. We made a short film. We got the boxing community. We got the community of Leicester out. And they're now advocating to have a statue for him because he was boxing in the 1930s. You'd have over 30,000 people come to see him box. He was known as a Shire man. He was a Black man. And actually it shows the intervention, it shows the relationship, and it shows that people are around. We also did a
We've
project
got
which was
about
also
1 minute left, Paulette.
right.
So you're
Okay.
through.
I'll just quickly then talk about. I'm going to go straight to provocations now because I've missed out loads of stuff. So apologies, but 7 minutes doesn't give you long. So my provocations are: how can you find and tell stories that are hidden in the footnotes of history? That's one. How can archival materials be used to inspire new stories and creative practice? And how do we move away from non-linear practices inspired by Sankofa, looking to the past to inform the present and the future? And for those that know what the Sankofa is, it's the double-headed eagle who looks back but also looks forward. And having that more sort of holistic approach to work is really, really important in terms of the work that we do. So how the past informs the future in terms of everything that we're doing. If I've got 30 seconds, I will talk about 100 Black women who made a mark. 100 Black Women Who Made a Mark was an initiative that we did a year ago. 5 Black portraiture artists did 100 Black portraits of 100 Black British women. And it was really important to do British women and to do the 4 nations, England, Ireland, Scotland, Wales. We didn't want it just to all be in London. And what was really important, and I'll just give you a couple of facts and figures, that there's 215,000 portraits in the collection of the National Portrait Gallery. Of those 215,000, only 3,000 are women. And then when you look at the National Arts List UK, there's 31,000 portraits that are in that. Of those 31,000 portraits, 8,815 are tagged as women, and only 114 are tagged as Black and Asian. And we did 104 portraits in one showing, starting in with Fanny Eaton in 1835 and to present day, ending with Mahalia, in terms of what we do. And there's a podcast series that sits alongside that as well. So we animated that where possible. So that we tried to do 100 podcasts. We've got 93 because some of the 26 of the portraits were posthumous, but we felt it was still important where we could get their families to talk about them. We did, and they're all online. Done.
Fabulous. Thank you. Thank you, Paulette. That sounds brilliant.
I was just going to come in, Marianne, because
Yeah.
just in terms of those provocations, a couple of people, well, someone's asked already, but I think it would be good to get those provocations maybe typed up. Have we got them anywhere already? Or Paulette, could you pop them?
Could you pop them in the chat, Paulette? That would be amazing.
Yeah.
Then people can reflect on them as you speak. But thank you so much for that.
I'll do that. I'll do that now.
Yeah, amazing. And I think that idea of a dialogue between the past and the present and the future, creating archives as creating dialogue is a really important thing that kind of ran through all your examples there of publications, of projects, um, and your provocations at the end. So thank you so much, Paulette. So we're going to move on to introduce Lukash now. Lukash is the archivist from MayDay Rooms, who describe they're an organisation, social justice organisation, that describe themselves as an archive resource space and safe haven for social movements, experimental and marginal cultures and their histories. Collective Encounters has a relationship with MayDay Rooms because in 2020 to 2022, 2023, Tessa's nodding, going, yeah, I think those dates are right.
I think it was early, yeah, 21, 22.
21, 22. We ran a project called Women in Action where we interviewed our participants, interviewed women activists in Liverpool to create a kind of heritage record of women's activism throughout the 20th and 21st century in Liverpool. And those oral histories now have been deposited with MayDay Rooms, and so have the work of countless other movements, organizations. It's a really, really rich resource they have, and we're delighted that Lukasz can be here. So I'm going to spotlight you, Lukasz, and then you should be able to share your screen.
Perfect. Thank you so much. Thank you so much for inviting us, and it's great to also reconnect with Collective Encounters through this event today. So I'm going to speak a little bit about MayDay Room's approach to archiving, and maybe ask some questions about usefulness of archives for social justice campaigns, because MayDay Rooms is first and foremost an archive. And our building in London contains an archive of historical material linked to social struggles, resistance campaigns, and experimental culture. And over last 10 years of MayDay Room's existence, it grew from a paper archive to a paper archive of over 100,000 physical items, over 2,000 films and videos, and a digital archive of over now, I think, 20,000 digitizations. So it contains really everything from recent feminist poetry to 1990s Free Party movement, paraphernalia from situationist magazines to histories of riots and industrial transformations, from 1970s educational experiments to prison writing. Actually, sorry, I forgot to share my screen, but I wanted to show you a couple of slides. I don't know if you can see that.
I think it's loading. There we are. Yeah, we can see it.
Perfect. So our archival practices and approach to history align with what it's known as history from below. So this kind of social history that describes the experience of ordinary people, as well as their history making power, which has long been left out of top-down historical narratives. So it is a method of approaching the past that concentrates not on the traditional subjects of history, so not on the kings and presidents and philosophers, but on ordinary people, not simply for what they experienced in the past, but also for their ability to shape the way history happens. And I really like this quote from Peter Leinbauer, because it really reflects, first of all, the risk that let's say social radical history faces, but also the possibility and the importance to preserve it, because we see history and knowledge production, its preservation and dissemination as another field of political struggle. And that's why the core work of MayDay Rooms is to activate the ephemera, the newspapers, the leaflets, the posters, the things that make up the material traces of past struggles. My provocation for today is quite simple. The question is, how can archives be an important site of organizing, and how can they play an important part in social justice movements? My own answer to this is that it's that let's say a radical archive cannot focus solely on cataloging, processing the materials, but it must focus equally, if not even more, on questions of accessibility and dissemination. And archives sometimes have this bad reputation. They're often embroiled in colonial and statist legacies, and often the most important archives are the ones that house materials gathered by, let's say, the most hated organizations, for example, the police or secret services. They are often used to legitimize claims of the powerful, hide histories of dissent, and produce politically useful narratives. Archive organization access is determined by hierarchical relationships of power, which make them rather than useful resources for all, sometimes non-pleasant institutions to interact with. Still, in my opinion, archive can be saved. And at MayDay Rooms, we try to dispel this myth that archives are somehow this kind of boring places, static repositories, and archive work needs to be this kind of tedious, alienating individual activity. We try to show that archives can be active resources, and archiving can be a collective social endeavor. Henri Langlois, which was an archivist and one of the co-founders of the French Film Institute, once said that the best way to preserve a film is to screen it. And I think it's a beautiful quote, and we follow this slogan and adapt it to our activities, trying to disseminate as much as possible our work and the content of the materials housed in our archive. We think that when it comes to especially radical archives, dissemination is also a form of preservation, because one of the ways to preserve archive materials is to make them actually as accessible as possible. They should be used by people. We should give these materials a second life by putting them back in circulation, connecting them to contemporary struggles, and experimenting with them. This is particularly important for us when it comes to remnants of radical history, in which the content is more important than the object. That's why at MayDay Rooms we try not to also fetishized too much the physical dimension of the item, as we are more interested in its continuing political relevance and impact that it can have on fostering contemporary struggles. That's why in our archive, apart from original materials, you can also find scans and copies. This way we make publicly accessible the contents of them without necessarily holding on to the original physical items. So we are very dedicated to this idea that in relation to preserving these movement memories of the primacy of use and open access. So we want people to come to the archive. You don't have to have an appointment. We want you to handle the material. We want you to reuse the material in your campaigns. We want also to build spaces for people who don't necessarily always come to archives. So our space is not just for researchers, it's also for campaigners and activists, because MayDay Rooms is trying to be an archive, as we say it, in the movement and not of the movement. We collect, catalog, digitize, archive these materials, and we do it because we firmly believe that they can resonate with us today, that they can still have political value for many contemporary political movements. So we see our role as through archival work to bridging the past with the present and showing that many struggles also continue today. And that of course means in our everyday work, being aware of the current political landscape, being reactive to it also through programming, highlighting particular collections, sharing expertise, providing tools, and also support. I need to say that none of us are actually trained archivists, and then that's sometimes a blessing and a curse, I would say.
Just got about 1 minute left, Lucas.
Yes, I'm almost
lovely.
done. Thank you. So not being a professional archivist, it means it has his bad sides and good sides, but it also means that we can make up our own systems and way of doing things. And so we also like to get people to kind of get involved in that as well. So we run regular scanathons, which are these collective digitizing sessions. We run cataloging sessions. We try and build systems that reflect the material that we hold rather than sort of hierarchical systems, these imposed structures of data. And we also invite a lot of social movement groups in to look at the archive, to be in conversation with the archive. And we also bring sometimes the archives in to those struggles. Because the bottom line of what we are trying to do is also to be more than just an archive. We also want to be a resource center and an organizing space. So the reading rooms and screening rooms that we have in our building serve a dual purpose. That of archival research, of course, but also of political organization, as they are freely available for grassroots organizations to organize meetings, assemblies, banner making sessions, workshops, or prison letter writing sessions. And I believe that this intentional blurring of boundaries between an archive, resource center, and an organizational social space is crucial for any radical archiving project that doesn't want just to preserve the history of radical politics, but want to push them forward. And of course, this work is a creative, is a collaborative process, often open-ended, sometimes messy, not always successful, but we hope it continues to build the space of critical opposition to inspire future struggles. So I invite everyone to come and visit us. Here on this slide, you can see some useful links, our website, our online catalog, and our social media. So hope to see you in person or during some online events. Thank you.
Thank you.
Just stop sharing.
Brilliant. I'll remove your spotlight so we can see everyone. Thank you. Thank you, Lukasz.
Thank you.
And I think, yeah, I really resonated with that quote of it's best to preserve it by screening it, by watching it, by interacting with history, and that idea of bridging the past, access to the past, building a bridge to it is really interesting. Thank you. So we now have about 20-25 minutes to have a discussion. So if anyone has any questions for Pawlet or Lukasz, wants to hear anything more about their work or the archives that they hold, or has any responses to those provocations, now would be the time. You can pop a question or a comment in the chat, or yeah, unmute yourself, raise your hand. Yeah, I'll open the floor now. Is there anything that anyone wants to respond with? Ella, hi.
Hi, thank you both for those brilliant presentations. I was wondering about drawing like a connection or an overlap between them. Paulette asked about how archives can be used to inspire new creative practice, and then I was really interested in what Lukasz was saying about interacting with the archive, like different communities coming in to interact with the archives. And I was just wondering on a really like actually just practical level, what tools or methods have worked really well for you both in terms of stimulating or facilitating that new creative practice coming out of archives or that interaction, and what are the challenges that you find? Thank you.
Thanks, Ella. Paulette, do you want to go first?
Well, I'm going to go off one of the things that Lucas said when he said that they are not archivists, and it being liberating. And actually, it is liberating because the perspective of the archivist, it doesn't necessarily always embrace what we need to do when it comes to diversity, in terms of the 9 protected characteristics. And they don't really see things from a particular perspective. And also, just because they've been doing it that way forever doesn't mean that it's right. It also doesn't speak to things that are coming out of a non-Eurocentric perspective in terms of how you catalogue, how you archive, how you look at the world, and how you may position the world. When we look at the things and everyone talks about Africa as if it's a country and it's a continent, you then start to drill down on that. When you look at a country like Nigeria that's got 525 languages, before we look at the tribes and we start to narrow down what specific element of work that we're talking about. And then you go to an archivist and it's just Africa. It's liberating when you just push the boundaries of that quite a lot. Also pushing the boundaries when you look at things to do with intellectual property and copyright, and how that world is changing, and how people have been exploited and abused within that system, and what they're talking about. And so you can come at it with a number of different challenges. It's not to say not to respect a process and a system. It's just that, all systems and processes can be challenged and prodded. And so I think the freedom is that, I don't sit here as someone who's come from a background of working in heritage and archives. I come from a background as somebody just wanting to find out more about who I am and my heritage, because it's always been poo-pooed or been putting on the bottom of the pile. And from that, it allowed me to open up the door, not just for myself, but for a number of different others. And so it's not just been the work that I've been doing specifically within the Black community. I've been able to go and work with the Asian community and help them to get their stuff off the ground as well, because it's about respect for others.
Mm.
I don't know if that answers your question or attempts to.
Luca, before we move on to Carla, Lukasz, do you have anything to say in response to Ella?
To respond to Ellen, to respond to Paula as well, because
And Paulette,
I think
yes.
it's connected. I will try to connect two things. I think it's true that, at least for me, my personal experience was really a positive thing. There wasn't a trained archivist. I wasn't kind of put into this orthodox way of approaching the materials they work with, or approaching history in general. Also, because I think that a lot of political work when it comes to archiving is not even about include. No, it's a lot of it, of course, it is, but it's including voices that have been previously omitted from history, but it's also being very aware and deconstructing the hierarchies of power in the process, in the archiving process itself. And this is something that is not, I think, done enough in kind of more orthodox approach to archiving, because there is a lot of kind of hierarchies of power that needs to be dismantled in the institution of archive, how archives are being run and how they operate. And this is what we are basically trying to do. And because we are not trained archivists, we also approach everyone who comes to our archive, or we approach the donors as people who are part of the archiving process themselves. So the donors help us to catalog the materials. They provide us with necessary context. There are people who come to our archive who probably know more about certain collections that than us. So we try to bring them in the whole process of archiving and cataloging. And for sure, what worked for us well is organizing moments of collective encounter around the archive, because those of you who work with in archives or like archiving know that sometimes it can be a very alienating, individualized experience. We're basically there with the collection. We try to go a little bit against this by organizing this trying to show people that archiving can be a social, a collective activity. And we try to do this, for example, through this, what we call scanatons, so this collective cataloging sessions. So this is where we lay out our digitizing equipment, which are very kind of simple flatbed scanners. We invite people to come to the archive. From one side, we teach them basic digitizing skills. So that's the positive aspect of it. They learn about specific archiving collections, and at the end we also end with a significant part of our archive being digitized. So this is, for example, something that worked really for us. And then people have food and drinks in our kitchen, or they just socialize. We also organize archive working groups. So these are groups of people who are interested in archiving that come to the building and help us catalog the materials. But also, MayDay rooms is really dependent on what people decide to bring into the building. So we really encourage people to get in touch with us if they have an interesting project. We are very happy to collaborate with people on their own things. We make all of our equipment, digitizing equipment, accessible if someone wants to use it. So what worked really for us is to create a very welcoming kind of an open space, rather than closing ourselves off from potential collaborations or relationships with who wants to come and use the archive.
Can I just add another thing that is also really important is the respect of oral history and the respect for where that sits within heritage and those hidden voices and and the stories and how they can hold those stories for years, and where you look at for those oral histories. So for instance, Calypso is social political commentary, and if you read or if you listen to the lyrics or go back on the lyrics, it will tell you what's been happening at a particular point in time, not just in their country, but in the world. But no one, so where do you find these oral histories, and how do you look at for these oral histories, and what is considered an oral history? And that's why I'm saying that, reshaping from a Eurocentric perspective of how we manage or approach heritage is really, really important.
And what heritage is as well,
Yeah.
the
Yeah.
objects of
Yeah.
heritage. Brilliant. Thank you both. Carla, I saw your hand peek up. Do you have a question?
I,
Comment?
first of all, want to say thank you so much for helping me be here today, Marion. It's really exciting. Hi, everyone. I have this funny situation where I can link both Paulette's work and Lucas's quite accidentally through a little anecdote, and that is I'm sitting at the bottom of Africa. I'm sitting right now in Cape Town, where I research social justice movements. And I happened a couple of years ago to be pottering along the South Bank in London, and I went into the South Bank Centre, and there was a badge making workshop happening. Oh, how exciting. I thought it was all sorts of things, and I was playing around making badges with historic material. And that is where I found out about MayDay Rooms, who had donated a lot of the material, who I now follow and have done for many years on Instagram, sitting at the bottom of Africa. And what you might be interested in, Lucas, is that I took that idea of badge making. I used it in a social justice movement conference down here. Huge success, huge excitement. And Paulette had spoken about the provocation of how do we have generative archives, not just collective. So the idea that how can they make new things? And so there's a beautiful story about how something you did about not calling it archiving, but calling it play, calling it just engagement, has led me to follow you, led me to know about what you do, and led me to spread it and a riff on it with sort of African movements. So thank you.
language is really, really important, though, again, because language is a barrier, and and so, and naming and claiming, and it blocks people out rather than letting people in. And so if we can, reshape the language that we're using so it's fit for purpose, and it empowers rather than disempowers, that's really, really another key milestone in terms of when we look at heritage and our views and the sort of the lens in which we approach that. So everything that we do in terms of serendipity is about changing the lens. And that's really, really important. And so when you go beyond the lens, you also then change the language.
Brilliant. Thank you. Thank you, Carla. Is there any other questions, responses, ideas bubbling? I think something that I was interested in was you both talked about kind of concepts of bridging or connecting or this idea of the non-linear. And that's something we've been really interested in as well, is that it's quite a Eurocentric way of approaching heritage is this happened on this timeline. And could you talk a bit more about that, I guess, Paulette, and if you have any insights on this, Lukash? Why? Because to me, that's quite a creative intervention into archiving, is understanding experience, heritage, time, even, and history as non-linear.
Well, I'm going to just do it as I am as a creative. And as a creative, we are taught from a Eurocentric perspective to compartmentalize. So we're a dancer, we're a musician, we're a writer, we're a singer, we're never all. If you come from an Afrocentric perspective, it's holistic and you can be all these things. So when you're approaching heritage, you bring all these things with you. You don't come with just one tiny little thing and say, right, I'm only going to do the purity of dance or the purity of this. You are a whole person, so you bring a whole thing to the table, a whole product to the table. So we wanted to look at Windrush one year and we thought, well, how do we approach that? So we did a piece called Siren Calls to an Elusive Journey. And it was also the 60th anniversary of independence for both Jamaica and Trinidad. And so I had got a Trinidadian choreographer and I got a Jamaican choreographer and I got a Kittitian composer and we created a new musical score. Each choreographer got the same music and was go away and come back to the table. One did it in the Victorian Gallery at Newark Museum, one did it in a Pros Arch Theatre. And it was really interesting. The Jamaican was ballet trained, but she defaulted to her heritage to tell the story. And it was interesting how the two stories ended up colliding, even though they never saw each other's work, because they were able to pull on all the facets, and she broke away from that wall of being very balletic, very placed and precision, to then going to her heritage, which allowed her a level of freedom that she didn't get when she was just doing it from, well, I'm a ballet dancer, I only do ballet and it's this way. And she broke down all those walls. And the music, if you listened to the music, and so although Philip is a classically trained composer in terms of the music, you could hear, different elements. So you could hear the Big Ben chiming in it, you could hear the classical undertones, but you could hear things like Wade in the Water and the Spiritual Needle within this one, because we didn't stick to this is how you do it. And so we then took the film on tour, and it was really, really interesting how that 35-minute film of the making of this piece of work spoke to so many people because it didn't alienate. And even though it was classical, which everyone says is really difficult for diverse communities, they were all inside the music and the piece and understood every element. And it's about being able to bring the whole of you to something rather than just saying it's this and this is the line and this is the path, because nothing's clean. There are no straight lines, So
Yeah.
when people think that everything's a straight line, there are no straight lines. Everything has more texture. and so it's when you are able to bring more texture to the table, that's what brings the richness, and that's what brings the story, and that's where you find the subtleties of all the bits that have been missed. So, if you just do this, you just do the popular narrative that's said. But if you just step back a little bit, you find those little nuggets that actually really make it a great story or a great bit of history or the thing that you didn't know. So, and a classic commercial thing that people have seen recently is Hidden Figures. When they look at that and who was behind Hidden Figures. But before, we were just told this one story. And no one wanted to unravel the sweetie paper and say, well, this is the paper. What happens when I take the paper off? And then when I take the paper off, and what happens when I go inside of this? No one wanted to unravel that. And when we start to unravel things and unwrap things a little bit more, it moves from that linear and it opens up and it blossoms into something else.
Thank you.
That's
Yeah,
helps.
that's really rich, and that idea of bringing the whole of you is such a beautiful, poignant, point about archiving is that when
Homi Bhabha talks about hybridization. I don't know if you've ever heard of Homi Bhabha, an academic. Any case, Homi Bhabha talks about hybridization, and as a person, you can be many, many different things. So I would start out, if I was to describe myself, is that I'm a Northerner, I'm a Mancunian, and I'm a Northern lass. Then I would move from that to say that I'm a New European. You could then move from that to say that I am Caribbean. I could move from that to say which parts, because I'm from two different parts of the Caribbean. I could move to that to say that I am African, and so he allows you to unravel who you are. And so if you go and look at some of his readings, his name's Homi Bhabha. I think he talks about these different places and spaces that you can be as an individual. It's no different from talking about things being linear, and you unravel who we all are, because we could all unravel ourselves in the same way that I've deconstructed saying, well, I'm a Northerner, I eat pie and peas, but let's unravel that a little bit further.
Yeah, thank you. I could see you nodding along a bit, Lukash. Do you have anything to add or response?
Yeah, again, I totally agree with Paulette, and I think also it's important to say that presenting history as linear is kind of very functional to some, because it means that it silences any alternatives. Presenting history as this kind of objective progress towards an inevitable goal is something, as I said, very functional, and also archives have this power to legitimize certain histories, but also legitimize power, but also legitimize certain histories. But we cannot forget that archives are always like a product of, to some degree, arbitrary selection of materials. There is always a process of discarding certain materials that didn't get to the archive. And we have to remember about this when when someone is presenting to us a vision of kind of objective history based on this kind of linear vision. And I guess this is what we try to do a little bit at MayDay's rooms, is to counter these narratives of historical inevitability in some way, and political pessimism that comes with it, and delving into these histories. From my personal experience working 4 years here, I can really also see that lots of the discussions that we are having today, that we feel that are very much kind of in our time, were already happening 20 years ago, 30 years ago, and it's a matter of, as Paul said, unraveling them, going back to them, and see how they can be useful for us today. Because something at history, it's a banal thing to say, it repeats itself very, very often, but also we need to be prepared with our vision of history, with our approach to it.
Yeah, definitely. And I think, what both of you were kind of, what I hear is this kind of almost rejection of this individualist Enlightenment man, and that's where linear time became, and this idea of history and heritage as linear and part of the Enlightenment came from this idea, and that collective rejection, or the the bringing the whole self or the whole heritage, or even like Paulette, you were talking about the kind of bringing those emotions in, which are things that aren't normally allowed in those pristine, you know, archives, is it's all very detached and factual. And I think that richness is yeah, amazing and beautiful.
It's usually factual from a Eurocentric perspective.
Mhm.
So who's saying that that is actually factual?
Yeah.
That's a story. Is it a true story? You know, has that story been tested? You
Mhm.
know, have we looked to see what they're saying? Is it correct? And from whose perspective is that correct?
Mhm.
You know, it's really, really important. And we
Yeah.
have so many examples in everyday life where we could challenge those stories. You look at all the Black people in the war as if they weren't part of it, and it's only now that we remember. In 1951, just after the Festival of Britain, there was a massive celebration for the Festival of Britain. And, all the dance activity that was happening up and down the country with people like La Bali Negro, which was the first touring company, one of the first touring companies that were, born out of the Caribbean and Black people, they were not allowed to perform in the Festival of Britain because, they said, oh, well, you're colonials, but you were okay to fight in the war, right? And so we need to tell the story because that's just a nonsense. And the current stuff around visas, where Jamaica was one of the only countries that couldn't have a visa, it has to have a visa, but it is a Commonwealth country. And now they're going to do it to Trinidad as well. These things are a nonsense. It doesn't make sense. And so, we need to unravel these stories and we need to have what I call, the double-sided, we don't want just heads and heads, we want heads and tails. Well, I want both sides of the coin. And I feel that we just keep on getting heads and then you flip it and then you get heads again and then you flip it and you get heads again. I'd like to sometimes see tails, yeah, and see what they've got to
Yeah,
say.
yeah.
So I think it's really important when we question from whose perspective.
Yeah, thank you so much. I'm going to kind of wrap us up on the Q&A part. But I would like to say thank you again to Paulette and Lukasz for those amazing provocations and for taking some time out this morning to speak to us. We really, really appreciate your perspectives on this.